It all started innocently enough. I wasn't really looking for new friends when I joined that forum. It was just one of those things. Bored one night, scrolling through endless feeds, and I stumbled across a discussion thread about horror movies. That's where I met him. His username was something generic, nothing that would make you pause for a second glance. But his comments were sharp, insightful, and he seemed to know every obscure horror flick ever made. We started chatting in the thread, then quickly moved to private messages. It was natural, like we'd known each other for years. We bonded over our shared love for all things creepy, late-night gaming sessions, swapping lists of horror movies we thought could actually scare each other, and endless conversations about the supernatural. At first, it felt good. He was always there, always ready to talk. I had been going through a rough patch, work was draining, and my social life was non-existent, really. Having someone to connect with, even if they were just a screen name, filled a gap I hadn't even realized was there. We'd chat until the early hours of the morning, and it felt like I'd found a true friend. It wasn't weird that we hadn't met in real life. Everything is online these days, right? But as time went on, our friendship became more than just a fun distraction. It was a routine. His messages would be waiting for me when I woke up, and he'd be the last person I talked to before I went to sleep. I started depending on him, looking forward to his messages more than I'd like to admit. He was the one constant thing in my life, and that felt safe. Or at least it did back then. First, everything seemed fine. Our conversations were just as fun as always, sharing movie recommendations, talking about our lives, and even venting about day-to-day frustrations. But then, things started to shift. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. He'd casually mention things about me that I don't remember ever bringing up. Like, one time I was complaining about my job, and he said, "Yeah, it must be tough with your boss always looking over your shoulder." That caught me off guard because I'd never described my work environment like that. Not to him, not to anyone. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I had mentioned it and just forgot. But little things like that started adding up. He knew what brand of coffee I drank, the exact color of my couch, even the weird scratch on my car that I hadn't told anyone about. I tried to laugh it off, but it didn't sit right with me. How could he know all that? Then came the messages at strange hours, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., times when I should have been asleep. He'd send cryptic texts, stuff like, "Can't sleep either," or "I know you're awake." The first few times, I chalked it up to coincidence, but soon, it felt like he knew my routine better than I did. He'd message me right after I'd get home from work, sometimes even before I'd had a chance to settle in. One night, I didn't respond right away, and he sent, "Busy watching TV again?" My TV wasn't visible from any window, and I hadn't told him what I was doing. That's when the unease really started to settle in. It was like he knew where I was, what I was doing all the time. I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder when I was out in public, feeling like I was being watched. I even started getting this strange sensation inside my own home, like there was something just out of sight, watching me from the shadows. I hadn't met him in person, yet somehow it felt like he was always there. I told myself I was being paranoid. I mean, how could he possibly be watching me? We'd never met, and as far as I knew, he lived miles away, maybe even in another country. But no matter how hard I tried to shake the feeling, it wouldn't go away. The more we talked, the more I felt exposed. Like he was digging deeper into my life, knowing things he shouldn't, things I hadn't told anyone. I should have cut it off right there, but I didn't. It wasn't long before the weird messages escalated. They went from strange to downright disturbing. One night, I got a photo from him, a picture of my street. Not some random street, but my street, taken from a perspective that looked like it was right outside my house. The message attached just said, "Nice place you've got." I froze, staring at the image for what felt like hours. I didn't respond at first. My mind raced. How could he possibly have this picture? Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe he was messing with me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too specific to be random. I finally responded with something casual, pretending it didn't bother me. "That's a little creepy. Haha. Where'd you find that?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, The reply sent a chill down my spine. You'd be surprised what you can find online. After that, it only got worse. I'd come home to find things in my apartment weren't quite the way I left them. My keys, usually on the kitchen counter, would be on the coffee table. A picture frame on the wall would be slightly tilted, even though I was sure it was straight that morning. And once, I found the front door slightly ajar, though I always double-checked to lock it. Nothing was ever missing, but the small changes were enough to make me feel like I was losing my mind. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The messages kept coming, and they were getting more intrusive. You should lock your door better, he texted one night. I hadn't told him about the door. I hadn't told anyone. I started feeling unsafe in my own home. The flickering lights at night, the sense of someone standing just behind me when I looked in the mirror. It all added up to this overwhelming feeling of being watched, hunted even. But there was no proof, nothing I could point to and say, this is happening. The tipping point came when he started getting angry. If I didn't respond to his messages quickly enough, he'd send passive-aggressive comments like, "Too busy for me now?" Or, "You've been ignoring me." One night, after I didn't reply to his message for a few hours, he sent me something that made my blood run cold. A picture of my house again, but this time taken from right outside my window. The message read, "I was closer than you think." That's when I knew he wasn't just some virtual friend anymore. He was here. Somehow, he'd crossed the line between our online chats and the real world, and he was much closer to me than I ever wanted him to be. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching, always watching, waiting for me to make a wrong move, and I had no idea how to stop it. After that last message, I knew I couldn't just ignore it anymore. The fear had crept into every part of my life, making it impossible to focus on anything else. I had to know what this person was. I started digging. I searched through every conversation we'd ever had, looking for clues. I Googled his username, scoured social media, but there was nothing. No real name, no pictures, no posts anywhere outside of the forum where we'd met. It was as if he didn't exist, at least not in the way a normal person should. I tried tracing his IP address through some sketchy online tools, but it led me nowhere, bouncing between different locations that made no sense. That's when the conversations started changing. He stopped talking about the things we used to, no more movies, no more casual chats. Instead, he'd send cryptic messages, asking questions like, "Do you believe in the afterlife?" Or, "What do you think happens when you die?" At first, I thought it was just more creepy games, but the tone, it felt different, darker, like he wasn't just asking for the sake of conversation, he was hinting at something I didn't want to understand. One night, after I tried to confront him, demanding he tell me who he really was, he responded with a simple, "You wouldn't understand." Before I could reply, he sent another message. "But I could show you." Against my better judgment, I agreed to a video call. Maybe part of me thought I could get a glimpse of his face, or maybe I was just desperate to make sense of it all. But when the call connected, the screen stayed black. I could hear his voice, but something was wrong. It wasn't just distorted, it was layered, like multiple voices speaking at once, some too low to make out, others whispering words that didn't sound human. I asked him to turn on his camera. There was a pause, then he laughed. A sound that was more of a guttural rasp than anything human. "You don't want to see me," he said, but I insisted, my fear warring with my curiosity. The screen flickered, and for a moment, I saw something, just a glimpse. A shadow, maybe? Face, but it wasn't right. The features were twisted, blurred, like they didn't belong on a human. The eyes were hollow, too dark, too deep, and for a second, I thought I saw something moving behind him, like shadows writhing and shifting in the background. I quickly turned off the call, my hands trembling. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. Had it been a trick? A glitch? Something he'd manipulated to scare me? But deep down, I knew. There was no way he could have faked what I saw, what I felt through that screen. This wasn't just some person messing with me. He wasn't human. Whatever he was, he had stepped out of the digital world, and now he was much, much closer than I could ever handle. And I had let him in. After that video call, I knew I had to cut him off for good. I couldn't let whatever he was into my life any further. The fear was consuming me. I barely slept. I didn't feel safe in my own home, and every shadow, every flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye made my heart race. I tried to block him. I logged into every account we'd ever used to talk, from the forum where we met to my email and messaging apps. Each time I blocked his username, but no matter what I did, he found a way back in. New accounts would pop up, but it was always him. Always the same messages. You can't get rid of me, or we belong together. I wiped my computer, deleted all my social media, even changed my phone number. For a day or two, it was quiet. I almost let myself believe it was over, that I had finally cut him out. But then the messages started appearing again, not just on my phone or computer, but on my television screen, on the smart lights in my house, even through my Bluetooth speakers. His voice would echo through my home, soft at first, whispering my name, but then louder, more insistent. Why are you ignoring me? He was everywhere. I couldn't escape him. One night, after days of this torment, I heard a knock at the door. My heart sank. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was late, too late for someone to be visiting. I crept toward the door, trying to peer through the peephole without making a sound. But before I could look, my phone buzzed with a new message. His message. Open the door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I backed away from the door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. But then I heard his voice, not from my phone or the speakers this time. It was right outside, just beyond the door. I'm closer than you think. My blood ran cold. I scrambled to lock the door, but before I could reach it, the lights flickered and the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, save for the soft glow of my phone screen. I tried calling the police, but the call wouldn't go through. The screen flashed again, another message appearing. Why are you so scared? We're meant to be together. Suddenly, the door creaked open, just a crack. Even though I was sure I had locked it, my entire body tensed, frozen in place, as I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from somewhere inside the house. I knew I hadn't let him in, but somehow he was here. He'd always been here. Then I saw him, not on a screen, not through a message, but in the flesh, or what looked like flesh. He was standing in the corner of the room, just barely visible in the dim light. His face twisted into that same unnatural shape I'd glimpsed during the video call. His form shifted, like it wasn't fully solid, as if he didn't quite belong in this world. See, he whispered, stepping closer, his voice now sickeningly sweet. We're finally together. I tried to run, but no matter how fast I moved, it felt like he was always one step ahead, like he could anticipate my every move. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavy, suffocating. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the crushing realization that I couldn't escape him. He wasn't just a person. He wasn't just a shadow. He was something else, something that had woven itself into my life, into my very reality. And there was no way out. The last thing I heard before everything went black was his voice, soft and triumphant, whispering in my ear, "You'll never be alone again.